Welcome back to another episode of the Empowered Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have a phenomenal guest with us. Her name is Fran Strickland. She grew up in South Carolina in the US and has since lived in the metropolitan area of Geneva, Switzerland since 2009. When she arrived there as an expat to head up the European regional HR function for SC Johnson, headquartered in rural South Switzerland. Her parents were educators, and extended family taught the values of integrity, hard work, continuous learning, and faith. And because of that, Fran is a determined person who believes in growing, reinventing herself, and staying positive and relevant while making meaningful contributions to life and the people around her. And so today, Fran's got a powerful story about going through the loss of her mother years ago. And it's something that I feel was very, very relevant for this podcast. And I think you guys are going to learn a lot about that journey of life when that time comes for all of us. So without further ado, I want to introduce Fran to the podcast. Fran, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you and with your audience today.
Likewise, it's really exciting to talk to everybody. When I'm on this podcast, I love talking to people that are from different cultures and different backgrounds and different parts of the world because even though we do share similar walks of life, like losing a parent, losing a child, our cultural differences bring a different aspect to that. And that's what I really love to show people is that there's not one specific way to grieve, and every loss is very unique and very different, but it's through the power of these stories that we can discover our own path forward through those moments of life. And so I'm very blessed to have you on the show today and to share your story.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It is a time of life that I do think about, but actually I'm very hopeful that I can bring the real essence and the heart of that time to who's listening, and that it can make a difference for people.
I remember you telling me when you went through losing your mom that she did a lot of preparation for that. She got everything lined up with paperwork and wills and what her, wishes were, things like that. And I also remember you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there was a lot of conversation though that went into deep details of things. You kind of had to discover that for yourself as you went through that experience.
Yeah, well, I'll just to go back a bit, growing up, once a year with my parents, we had the conversation that they were on their way out. That was the way they talked about their demise, you know, uh, for with us, and it was three of us girls, and I have an older sister that's like 7 years older than me, and then I have a younger sister that's 10 years younger than I am. So we were pretty spread out. But I do remember growing up that about once a year we'd have this conversation, and they would tell us, take care of business and cry later. And
Mhm.
that was kind of the extent. And then, of course, as we've gotten older, I lost my father in 1988 suddenly. And then my mom, this is 1991, and she had experienced actually a near death experience. We were able to make an intervention, and she had a good quality of life, but she was nearing the end of her life. And, there we were. We had that basic training, and so now it was like, go do it.
Well, that's a very interesting perspective about take care of business and worry about the feeling side of things later. That's a very interesting perspective when you're talking about end of life, scenarios. And I do think that what's interesting about that is that we're all human beings and we have emotions and we have feelings. And some of us are able to separate those more so than others. Some of us feel those things a lot heavier than other people. What
Mhm.
was that like when you heard that? What were your feelings around that?
I was young. I mean, and when I say young, I wasn't even a teenager yet. And I took it in. I was kind of cerebral as a kid. I would read encyclopedias for fun. So I just kind of processed it as a statement of fact. But I had lost, like a grandmother, and I remember crying at the funeral, and I remember feeling sad that I wouldn't see her anymore. So I had a sense of that when my parents died, I wasn't going to see them anymore. And but I processed it like, okay, it's a fact. But yet deep inside, and especially as because my mother was she wasn't ill in a long time, but you could see the deterioration over a period of time, that I had the moments when I was very sad because I knew what was coming. And I think I did a lot of my grieving before her actual passing.
Well, that's one type of grief that has been talked about very little on my podcast, but there is this concept in the grief world called anticipatory grief. And it's where
Mhm.
we're in those situations that we may be dealing with a terminally ill parent or grandparent, and we know it's coming. We just don't know when. And
Right.
you're kind of in that place of just apprehension constantly saying, I know the outcome and I get what's going to happen and I can't change it, but it's still living with this, like, how much time do I have with this person, and how do I want to spend this time, or how do they want to spend this time? And you go through so much emotion in that moment, and then when the passing
Mhm.
hits, it's almost like it's almost like being on a roller coaster where you're kind of going up that thing, and the drop's coming, and then they leave you hanging there until the very last minute to go over it. And that's a very heavy and a very, very hard feeling for people to go through.
It really is. Because I was living in Wisconsin at the time, and my mother was in Maryland, and she was with my younger sister. So every weekend I was traveling to Maryland to spend time with her, and we had some very special times where it would be just the two of us on the weekend. My sister would be out doing something, and uh, and I wanted to try to replicate those experiences, just to anchor them into my spirit, so I could recall them. And it got to the place where she wasn't able to do those things. And so when it came, I remember it was a Wednesday, and my sister and I had gone to the Walmart to pick up some things that she needed, and it was just before Mother's Day. And we were looking at Mother's Day cards, and my younger sister picked up the card, and she looked at it and she put it back. She said, "Oh, we won't need that. Mom's gonna be gone by then." And I remember when she said that, it was like a joke, right? It's like, yeah, that this is coming. She was in hospice, we had somebody with her, and then we came home, and she was still there, and we were in and out of the room and talking with her. And like in a split second, we had been in the room, we walked out the room and turned around and went back in the room, and she was gone. She just slipped away, as if she didn't want any of us around. She wanted to do it her way, and she was gone. And she'd already told us what to do with the body, to clean it, prepare it. We had already been in contact with a funeral home in the vicinity, and they were prepared. The hospice nurse came and, of course, verified that she had passed. But it's the sensation of it. First of all, she was gone, and it was like, how could you do that to us? You slipped, you didn't let us, be with you. And then, but we realized that was our mother. She was kind of unintrusive and very independent, so it was consistent with who she was. And with all of the arrangements that made, she donated her body to science. Okay, so we weren't going to even have the body unless we requested the ashes back. But we determined that wasn't her. So we didn't need the ashes. It was, though, if I would dare say, it was weird. It was weird because the varying emotions, the sense of loss, but the sense of it's not confusing because so much had been done in preparation. But it was still this emptiness, and I had all this time left because I had spent so much time being there for her, right? And then I realized that that part of my life was gone. It was that was freed up time, and I actually asked myself, what am I going to do with that time?
That's a very powerful question to ask in that moment. That's, I think that's something that's a big challenge when we go through a loss like that, losing a parent. When we almost become caretakers in that moment, we're in a
Right.
place where they're just not able to take care of themselves the way they used to. And so we always step up and we love our parents and our family like
Hmm.
that we will do
Hmm.
anything. We move schedules around, or maybe we still work, but we're still full-time caretakers in that end of life moment. And
Right.
when that moment comes where they pass, all of a sudden the world just stops. And we all of a sudden
Right.
now get all this time back. But then we start going, I just went through caretaking and preparing for this loss, like you brought up with anticipatory grief. Now she's passed away, and now it's like, whoa, I just got all this time back in my life, but I'm grieving. I'm actually grieving this loss, and I'm actually now saying, what does my world look like? Because as you said, I'm not going to be able to see them anymore, and they're not going to be in my life anymore in this
Right.
physical capacity. And so it can really have this deep sense of emptiness and this deep sense of, how do I refine my steps, and what does this new chapter look like for me?
Right. And Chris, also remember, sometimes, watching a film or TV, and you will hear the character say, I'm an orphan, right? When they no longer have both their parents, they say, I'm an orphan. And I remember also that I really loved having my parents' approval. They really were our best friends. We could talk to them about anything. Now, they weren't always easy to talk to, but we could go to them and talk to them about anything, and they would be there for us. And a part of the joy I had growing up and the accomplishments that I had achieved was the fact to see them with pride, to talk about us and talk about the things we had accomplished. And I also felt that deep sense of, well, now who's going to be there behind me, motivating me and cheering me on? And and I think that was even bigger for me than the other part of the process, because that was such a big motivation for me.
I'm really glad you just shared that, because that's exactly how I felt when my grandfather passed away. Because I didn't have a dad in my life growing up, and grandpa was dad and grandpa for me. And what you just said really resonated with me, that sometimes we look forward to sharing our accomplishments and sharing what we've achieved with our life. And when we hear our parent or our grandparent talk about us in that way, it gives us a sense of we're on the right track, or we're doing something good, or we're doing something right. And
Mhm.
I share that feeling with you, because when my grandfather passed, I felt the same way, because a lot of
Mhm.
times I always look to that person for this like confirmation, or this like, yeah, you're doing right,
Mhm.
you're doing good. How,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, how did that play out for you after that? Where did you find that rock, so to speak, that place to give you that confidence to go forward? Because I mean, you're a very accomplished person, by the way. I've seen your background, and you've done a lot of things and done a lot of good work in the world. And where did you find that confidence, so to speak, after they passed?
Mm. Just let me reflect a moment, because at first it's like stumbling forward. You just start walking. It's like being in the dark. And the darkness is the kind of this source of inspiration and encouragement is no longer there. And you're walking in the dark because you don't quite know how to get that validation. Now, my sisters are fantastic, but they're not mommy and daddy, right? They're not my parents, they're not my mother and father. And I remember having this sense, not only was I not as busy in terms of demand of my time, I had I didn't really have that reinforcement. And I remember returning to work in Wisconsin, and I had a very demanding job, a really demanding job. And uh, I suppose she died in 2006, so I had about a year, and it was a blur, to be honest. It was a blur. It was that being in the darkness, in the dim light, kind of finding myself. And then I took my first international assignment, the first assignment outside of the US, and I came to London. And it was only for a short period of time. It was a short assignment, a developmental assignment. And that was when I started to become more aware. So I would say that I had to replace, I couldn't replace it, but I had to fill the vacuum with something that was different and unrelated. And I
Mm.
remember that I knew as long as my parents were living, I would not go outside of the United States to live or work. And so now that she was gone, and I had gone through this period, and when this offer was made to me, I said, okay, this is the time to do it. So it took me a good year. It was almost exactly a year to the day that she passed when I got this assignment to go abroad.
That's incredible of the timing of that. That's just very interesting. But
So a lot of those kind of things that's happened in my life.
I think that that's a something I always talk about in grief coaching too, is I always tell people to change their environment a little bit as they're going through grief. And something I found in my own course of going through grief and healing is that when you do change your environment, and you can go to a different city, or for me, it's going out in the mountains and out on an offbeat trail, or even moving abroad, like you just brought up, that change in
Mhm,
environment does something where it kind of pops you out of that place that is extremely comfortable, where the heaviness
mhm,
of the emotion and the feeling is so strong and overpowering that you almost, for lack of a better term, feel suffocated by it. It's just very, very hard to see differently or see out from it. And when you change
mhm,
your environment like that, it gives you this breath of fresh air where you can actually see yourself and hear yourself, and you can start
mhm.
processing these emotions and your feelings, and you can start realizing, what this experience gave you and what it was teaching you.
Mhm, mhm. That was exactly. And I remember saying to my sisters that when I took that assignment, I got healed in a number of ways. One, I started to find balance between work and life, and to appreciate that it was important for me to have me time and to enjoy life, and to work to live and not live to work, I would say. And I also I had a physical impact, if you will, physical manifestation of restoration and recovery. Um, my heart took a longer time to heal, okay, but it wasn't that what I call it is so overwhelming that you feel you can't go on. It was just enough difference to offset that devastating sense of loss.
I think that's a very hard place a lot of people go through in grief, and I've gone there myself, where that that loss feels so overwhelming and devastating, like you said, that you almost get paralyzed in the moment. And that
Mm-hmm.
happens to everybody, by the way. That's not a one-off
Mm-hmm.
circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's hard about that is when we are in that place, we've got such strong emotions and strong feelings and that entrapment that we don't, oftentimes we always try to avoid it or run from it or suppress it, or we take it to an extreme sometimes. And that's where it starts chipping away at us. It starts taking away
Mm-hmm.
from our life. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a very hard path to try to navigate through that, to figure out how you can move through that. It's very,
Right.
very different for everybody. It's a very personalized journey. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it really begins with just small steps every day where there, I wanted to ask you that next part, because you moved abroad, what were some very small steps you took in your everyday life as you began to heal from that place?
I remember when I got back to Wisconsin, and as I said, I had a very demanding job. I didn't I didn't just throw myself into work. Sometimes, you could just start working and you're just oblivious and it dulls the pain, right? What I did realize that I needed to have more human contact, which was totally different than the way I generally handle situations when I was sad or hurt. My nature is to withdraw and go within and just stay away from people. And I even do that now. But in that case, when I went back, I had a few people in my network, people that I had relationships with. They were friends. And so I tried to spend time with them. It wasn't a lot of time, but it was much more time than I had been spending because, of course, I had my mother. But as a rule, I didn't really hang out. I didn't visit with people. I didn't go to their home and stay for hours or spend the night with them and those kinds of things. I started doing just a little bit of that. Hey, can we get together? Let's go shopping or let's go to lunch. I really did not do a lot of that before my mom died.
Interesting. I see. That's what the difference is. I think that happens through grief is we have that place. I'm a lot like you. I like to go within and kind of not be out in the world and seeing people. But when you do open up that door, it kind of it lessens the pain that happens, and it gives you
Hmm.
that opportunity for people to ask you questions or hold space for you or
Hmm.
find ways to support you. And I think sometimes it opens a door for people to say things to you the right way that maybe it's something you need to hear. um, what was it like, when you did lose your parents? I know you said you have some sisters in your family.
Hmm.
What was it like in that situation? Because I'm a only child. I never had
Hmm.
siblings, but when you went through that loss, what was it like to have your sisters with you on that journey? And did you guys grieve in similar ways? Did you support each other in different ways? What was that like as you guys grieved together?
Okay. Well, my older sister was married and had a family at the time, and younger children. So her time was taken up with her family. Um, it was my younger sister and I were kind of the two that was taking care of my mom and, watching out for her and getting her to appointments and, spending the time. And in fact, my younger sister had even more of that because she was just out of college and job search. So she had a little bit more time with my mother in that regard. Um, for my oldest sister, uh, Beth, and my younger sister Carol. Carol and I just made sure that my sister was in the loop. Okay, that decisions that needed to be made, she was aware of it. The way my mom had organized um, the business after her leaving, we knew that everything was divided three ways. And so we didn't have to argue about who got what. My mom took care of that. So it was a matter of informing my older sister where we were in the process and checking in on her to ask her how she was doing. Okay.
Mm,
And she was so busy with her family, she compartmentalized it.
mm,
Okay. My younger sister and I, we did grieving together. And so I remember that it was like she died on Wednesday. It was we had gone to the funeral home to see the body the next day. And then we went out for lunch and we came back and my sister had like a in-law suite. It was a space on the first level that was a nice place for someone who to have like a nice sitting area, TVs and everything. And so we went into that room. And I remember looking in the closet and seeing one of my mother's garments, and I started to cry. And my younger sister told me, she said, "That's okay. She was your mama too." And that was the nature of that relationship. It was an understanding. And it was almost like when one was down, the other one was a little stronger that could pull the other one up. And we basically process, okay, who could be here? And Beth is not, she can't be here. She's got a family. So we have these two. So let's do what we do. And I was the executor of the estate. So I had that
mm.
work to do as well. So then I went back to take care of business, cry later.
You know, that's just such a powerful phrase that they said to you, take care of business, cry later. And part of me in the grief space is saying that's the backwards thing to do in some ways, but at the same point, I love what your family did in so many ways of preparing for this, lining everything up. Because I think when a lot of us do go through grief and loss, and when I lost my grandfather, for example, I don't think things were very put together about what was going to happen and what we needed to do. And it almost is like a free for all in a lot of ways. And I think that, when you're going through a loss like that, your emotions are very, very heightened. You're very, very sensitive
Mhm,
and hyper aware. And
mhm.
sometimes, I'll say doing the right thing or taking the right action can be very, very hard when you're in that heightened state. And I think it was such a gift that your parents gave you to have all this planned out, have all this structured, have all this step one, two, three all lined up, because I really do think in many ways that really did allow you to grieve in many ways, and a way that you needed to grieve without really having so much pressure and so much unknown or uncertainty around that circumstance.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, Chris. The uncertainty. It wasn't, we had lost my father and we had gone through that process with him. So my mom saw the things that was difficult to navigate when he passed. And so she wanted to make sure that we didn't have to go through some of those things. Um, and so she took extra care to simplify the process. And I do appreciate, as you said, that many times when people lose parents, um uh, it's like, oh my goodness, what do we do, because they were living life and you were living, your life, and sometimes those important things didn't meet, especially if it's a sudden loss. You don't have time to even talk about it, and you have to find things, you don't know where to find things, and it can be terribly unnerving. And then you start to feel guilty because you're trying to take care of this business and you're thinking, but my heart should be hurt. And then you get into this, but I'm not crying or I'm not showing how I'm feeling, and all of that just gets to be a little bit of self-condemnation and then regret, and it just snowballs. It can snowball. And I think that some of the certainty that my mother interjected into this process was hugely beneficial for us. And knowing my mom, that was fully her intent, to make it as simple for us as she possibly could.
I think she did a great service to you for that. Because like we've said, it's a messy process sometimes when our loved ones pass because
Mhm.
we're dealing with, is there a will in place? Is there a trust in place? What are their
Mhm.
wishes? What do they want as far as their
Mhm.
cremation or their funeral? What do they want for that?
Right.
Their celebration of life. And
Mhm.
oftentimes, nobody leaves that lying around. So when things happen, we start going, oh my God, now what do I do with this? Or how do I do that? And, who do I even call? That's the big question that blew
Right.
into my mind when I went through that. I was like, okay, who do we call? How do we deal with this? Like this is all in the middle of you, by the way, having your own emotional grieving process of what
Right.
just happened. And so it can feel like you've got, 1,000 airplanes running around in your head all at once. And, you almost feel like you just can't even think straight or, say the right thing in certain moments. It just makes it very challenging.
Right. Yeah, that I it I'll tell you a little story. So of course we had to go through probate. My mother had arranged all the financial arrangements so that we had access to her accounts, and so that wasn't something we had to go through. And she'd already told us, if anyone shows up and says that I owe them money, that's not true. I have no debts. All of those are paid. So we had visibility of all that. But came time, I was living in Wisconsin and we were talking about doing probate. And somehow I got into my head that we had like 2 years to do probate, which is absolutely wrong. It was just absolutely wrong. I think about that now. I think about that now. How could I be so far off? And I actually believe that that was just part of me delaying dealing with the hard truth that she had passed. Even though I was handling things like the way they taught us, I really was having another level of experience that was affecting me and showing up in different ways.
Well, I think that's what is. I love that you gave that example that you thought you had 2 years and we find out you didn't. That's exactly what goes on through grief and in this process. And uh, I certainly went through that with my grandfather. It was like you had to make decisions like quick kind of thing. And I was going, how are you supposed to make these decisions fast? I mean, you got to think about things. Did they you brought up probate having 2 years. My thought with the funeral home too was like, well, can we like think about this for a day or two about whether or not cremating or funeral is the right thing? Because I know there's a will in place, and you got to make sure that you're following wishes, kind of thing. And
Right.
uh, there's kind of this pressure that sits there, and sometimes I think that 2 year mark you were talking about, I ran into that same kind of feeling in that moment where I was just like wanting more time, I guess is what that
Right.
was. And
Right.
I was in a bad state of denial when I went through that stuff. So I was sitting there going, yeah, I got time. I got time. And I was like, no, you don't have time. Like you have to be here. Um,
Right.
it's a very challenging period of time there. I wanted to ask you, Fran, because I know people have, I don't know your spirituality or your faith, but I like to ask this question because I've talked to people who are very spiritual.
Mhm.
Was there anything that happened spiritual wise that happened around your mom's passing? So I have talked to many people that have had dreams of like seeing their loved one that passed like a 30-day window after their passing. I've had other people see random signs like feathers or birds or golf balls, for example, with one of my people I talked to. Did you have anything spiritual related happen after your mom passed?
What happens for me when I'm having difficulties, I'll have a visit. I'll have a visit. And one of the things that happened was very interesting because my grandmother, my mom's mother, lived uh, for about 4 or 5 more years after my mother passed. And so now I was flying from Wisconsin to South Carolina to visit her. And I tried to go at least once a month, and I was preparing to make this trip to go see her. And I didn't get to go the first weekend, and I had planned another weekend. And I had I had a dream. It was a progressive dream. So the first dream, my mother and my sister were at the airport in Milwaukee. And I was there with them, and we were waiting to board the plane. That was the dream. Then the next night, I had another dream. And there my mom and my sister were with me in the Milwaukee airport waiting to board the plane. So this time, the dream ended with us walking to the plane, and it ended. Because it was a commuter, one of those little commuter jets, propeller at that time. Okay. And but the third dream, there was my mom, my younger sister, and me, and we walk out and we get on the plane and we take off. And the plane could not have been more than maybe 100 yards off the ground. And I was looking at the front of the plane, and I saw the plane start to veer, like, to turn. But it wasn't turning like they were circling out of the airport. It was going down. And
Okay.
I woke up. I woke up and I called my younger sister and I said, Carol, I said, I had this dream. I said, it's the same dream, it's progressive. And I have this trip to go to see Granny. That's what we called her. And I said, but Mama was there. She was there with you and me. I said, I think I'm not supposed to take that trip. And so my younger sister said, I think you're right. Don't worry about going this month. So I canceled my trip. And there was an air accident. It wasn't my flight, but there was an air accident where the plane skidded off the runway and people were injured. And after that happened, my older sister called. She says, you can make your trip now. Either my mother or my father will show up when we're in distress or is something that we either need to think about not doing.
Yeah.
When they show up, we listen.
That Fran, that gave me some serious goosebumps of just having that dream and I mean I know it wasn't your flight, but all the same, having an air accident happen at that same time, that was I'm not a believer in coincidence for that reason because I do think that there's a higher level out there spiritually that does protect us from that. And I do feel in many ways, I think your mom knew something like that could happen or might happen and really tried to protect you. I think that's powerful.
Chris, I am a person of faith. And I mean, one time I actually was a lay minister, and I worked with people in that space. And I remember talking with my pastors about those kinds of experiences. And one of the things that I was told is that, you know, we have revelation. We have ways of knowing things that we have no other way of knowing except by something bigger than us. Okay. And that many times a willingness to be obedient to the message can change an outcome. because it's all energetic. And when I think about that, and I said, perhaps where it may not have been me specifically, it could very well have been the outcome that was much more serious for someone else. And I like to believe that we are so connected that just because it's like us being in the middle of it, it could really have bigger implications for others around us.
I think that's a big, I'm really glad you said that because I do feel in many ways, we are all energetic. We are all connected. I really believe that because I've had some life experiences I can share for another show, but um, I do feel like the universe has some way of connecting us. And I do think that in many ways, God, he protects us from certain things. He knows what's going to happen. He knows when it's going to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I always kind of equate it to on my show, like if you're walking along, God kind of just goes like that and he'll push you an inch off your course. But and sometimes you won't know why. And you'll always have that feeling of like, I don't know why, but I'm just not going to do this. Like when you canceled your
Mm-hmm.
flight, you said, yeah, I had this dream. I don't really know if this is even real. I'm canceling this. This is weird.
Mm-hmm.
It's that feeling of redirection. That's what God does to us, redirection.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes we don't believe it or we don't understand it or we don't agree with it, but then we see the outcome, we go, "Oh, that's why." And
Right.
and that to your point
Absolutely.
about being obedient with that, I think that when we do listen to God and listen to his path and where he's taking us, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes, you end up in a place of life where you're just going, why am I here? And why is this happening? And what's the purpose of this? What's the meaning of this? And then you'll see
Mm-hmm.
it later on and you'll go, I get it now. I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just feel like I feel like your mom has left so many gifts to you and so much guidance left, even though she's not here physically. I feel like she still has a
Mm-hmm.
way to connect with you and guide you.
I do. I think about me being in where I am now, being in Switzerland. I grew up in a very small community in South Carolina, and I had my share of people saying that I was going to amount to zip, because I was a very active, inquisitive child, and I had my own mind. But when I look at where I am, I feel that it's not by accident. There were huge things that I needed to do to be in my purpose. Is what my sense is, and certainly my mom and my father both had a big role to play in that. The foundation and faith that we got in our family, and then the way they prepared us for life. It was like, um, when my mom left, we were ready to take care of ourselves. And I remember her praying. We could hear her praying in the morning. She prayed out. She would pray out loud, and you could hear her saying, "Father, I want to live until my children are ready and able to stand on their own."
Your story gives me goosebumps, Fran. I feel like I feel like your mom had some kind of very divine connection for all, and like you just said, I think coming back to what you said a minute ago, I think everything lined up the way it needed to for your life, where you're at today, how that story transposed. I just really
Hmm.
feel like that you're following the path of where you belong and where you need to be. And I think it's a powerful place when you can surrender to that path and just know and accept that where you need to be is where you're at right now. And that's all there is. And it's a comforting feeling in a lot of ways.
It it is, and believe me, I'm saying, okay, I've been here 16 years. It was supposed to be 2 years. It's time for me to be heading home, and so I'm saying, okay, I tell me when it's the right time for me to go, and there are things that I need to do to prepare for that. But I'm happy to hear you say that you are where you are, where you need to be, and that's a place of peace. to accept where you are is where you're supposed to be.
Well, that's the hardest challenge, and that's why I call myself an acceptance coach because that was the hardest struggle I had going through my losses, and I've seen it with a lot of other people too. And acceptance is this ability to not deny reality, and it's a place to say, I accept this. Doesn't mean I like it and I agree with it, but I accept where I am today. And I know that I'm on a path to where I need to be and where I need to go. And when you, as you said it very eloquently, because I haven't phrased it that way before, but I love it, which is that I have peace and contentment where I'm at. And
Mhm.
that is something I think we all should strive for. And that
Mhm.
doesn't mean, like I said, we agree to it or we like what's in front of us, but it gives us that
Mhm.
place of calm where we can start actually listening and start seeing where this path might take us. And to know that it's part of the journey. I mean, if you might have gotten on that plane that day and I mean, you might have been involved in that crash that happened. You might have been injured. You might have lost your life. It very well could have happened. And
Mhm.
to say that divine intervention happened, I think is a very valid thing to say in that moment. And, listening to that inner intuition, listening to that inner guidance, listening to that spirit talk, I mean, it does. And I think that that's where we spend so much of our life chasing things and living in this physical world and trying to, be this or do that or think this way or make this thing happen and force things all the time when sometimes we just need to sit back and listen and really just listen to God or spirit, whatever you want to call it, but just listen to it tell you, hey, this path over here just isn't for you. And that's okay. But this path over here is open and this is the one you need to go
Mhm.
to.
Mhm. Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and I've had some profound experiences along the way, even before my mom, before she passed. I mean, the fact that she was, if even living in 2006, because she actually did. She died. The doctor said she died 15 years before. And that was intervention after intervention to have her. So yeah, I feel like there's something bigger that's been walking with me and with us, and certainly even meeting you, for example. And recently, I've had so many of these opportunities to meet people of faith that were serving others, and I'm listening to what's being said about that in my spirit.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that, Fran, because I do believe that everybody that I cross paths with on the podcast didn't happen by accident. It was always through somebody saying, "Hey, you should meet this person or you should talk to this person." And I really do believe that God puts people on our path for a reason and a purpose. And sometimes those are messages we don't always are ready to hear, or sometimes we don't want to hear, but we need to hear it. And it gives us
Mhm.
that preparation for that next phase of life. And
Mhm.
sometimes those people come along on our path because we've got something we need to share with them. And so,
Mhm.
coming back to what we talked about a little earlier, is that, we are a big collective of energies. We're not very different people in so many ways. We're very connected. We walk
Mhm.
similar journeys and similar paths, and
Mhm.
we're never truly alone. That's the beautiful
Right.
thing about life is we're never truly alone.
That's right. That really is. And we could just be open to receive.
I think
Yeah.
that's a beautiful message. Well, Fran, I just want to say it's been a true honor, to meet you. I know Steve got you and I connected, so I'm very, very grateful for him for allowing us to have this space today on this podcast to share your story about an incredible woman. I just get this sense your mother was just a very incredible woman to be around in life. And I got that overwhelming sense as you were talking about how loving and caring, how connected she was with you, and how she still helps you today just through spirit. And I think she's a beautiful person. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your journey through grief and how you learned how to heal, because I really do feel like this episode is going to help a lot of people who are going through losing a parent or maybe have lost a parent and just don't know how to get through that path, find their own way. So I just want to say thank you
Mhm.
for that.
Well, thank you. It gave me a chance to express and in a different way. And I'm really blessed with this opportunity. And, bless you and bless your audience, the people who hear this, that it will really, you know, comfort them and help them. Thank you.
Well, well, Fran, as I usually wrap up the podcast with a couple questions for my guests. One of them is if you run into somebody going through grief and loss or somebody who feels stuck in that, what's one bit of advice you would share with them?
First, give themselves permission to feel. And so many times we'll say, no, don't feel that way, or I don't want to be self-centered. And I think that's the biggest concern for many people is they don't want to be a burden. And so they either hide their grief or they don't express it. They tap it down. And I said the first thing is to give yourself permission to feel and realize that the process is very individual, and to be okay to say, you might have your experience with grief, but I have mine, and to claim that journey. But at the moment you start to feel that it's no longer serving you and it's preventing you from moving forward, and you have that split brain about it's time for me to move forward, but I'm stuck, then that's your spirit telling you it's time to take an intervention and get help.
That was beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that you said it's an individual journey because that's the thing that I try to break right now in the grief community is that we don't need to compare grief journeys. You are not going to grieve like somebody else. You can't do it Chris's way or Fran's way, but you can hear the stories we share and
Mhm,
discover that individual path for you. That you said
mhm.
that so beautifully. Thank you. Um,
Thank you.
and Fran, if people want to connect with you after listening to this podcast episode, where can they find you?
They can find me in Bright Lights on LinkedIn under Frances Melvina Strickland. That's my passport name. So if they look up Frances Melvina Strickland, Frances with an E, they will find me. But I also have a presence on Facebook as Frances Strickland and Instagram under my business name of Vero Lead Consultancy.
I love that. And for listeners today, just so you guys know, when you get done listening to the podcast, look in the show notes because I will have Fran's social media and her website there for you guys to connect with her. I definitely recommend reaching out. She's a beautiful lady, as you guys have listened to this last hour. And she's got a lot of deep insights and just a beautiful life that has come out of this. So I really want you guys to reach out to her and connect with her. And Fran, I know you talked to me about writing a book when we first talked. Did you want to share where we could find that book?
Oh, yes, the book. I have to remember the name because I wrote it in 2012. It was a download by Spirit. The book is called um, Possible. Think It, Believe It, Know It, and it's under my pen name of Veronique Dupree Chastain. It's a story behind that name, but it's Veronique Dupree Chastain. And what I could do is I can send that to you, and then if you want to put it where your listeners can find it, you can. And they can get it from Amazon, by the way.
That's amazing. I will, if you want to send that to me, I'll be happy to put that out there where my listeners
Sure,
can grab it.
I will
But
do
Fran,
so.
again, been such a beautiful journey to meet you, my friend, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you here as we go forward.
Same here. Thank you so much for your time and for the time of your listeners. And again, be blessed, everyone.
Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Fran and I on today's episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Fran's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.